Hello and welcome to another in what is the weekly development recap videos of Wolfgang. Last week, if you recall, or if you've been following the videos, I talked a bit about some of the optimization that's been done, and also that a lot of time was spent refactoring the controls for the game. Now, as a consequence of refactoring the controls, I actually broke the level editor that I used to design the maps. So some time was spent rebuilding that to work with the new refactored code. And it does work better now, which is good. But I also figured it would be a good opportunity to sort of go over the level editor tool that I've developed to show you guys how it works and all that. So if you've been following the project for a while, you might have noticed that on the Kickstarter that we ran, one of the stretch goals was to expose the level editor for players to be able to create levels. That was something that I really wanted to do because one of my favorite things in Advance Wars actually was being able to make my own levels and challenge my brother and my friends to try my levels. I don't know, it was a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite things in a video game is when there's a level editor. That might be telling as to like my enthusiasm for making games myself, but yeah. The reason it needed to be a stretch goal is because while it is developed to run like in game, the controls are all still within the Unity editor. So the map renderer has a lot of controls. The map renderer component that I've developed has a lot of controls for editing the map that is made available through the Unity editor. So it's still a component in the Unity editor and still requires access to it. So it's popped open the tiles by default, so I'll just show you how simply it works. It's just select a tile and then you're good to go. So this is kind of slices together tiles from the texture atlas for this particular environment. You can load different textures into it, such as like if it's like a snowy area or something. All of that stuff is handled up here, so there's a lot of metadata in terms of like the map name, what texture it uses, the background music for the level, the size of the map, the file name for the map from which to load it, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So you can edit the tiles from here. It slices it and puts it across multiple pages, so like if I'm looking for a specific tile, I can keep cycling through pages. There aren't that many tiles to choose from right now. I've just sort of been drawing them as I need them, but this is useful for like by the time it's a full game and there's lots to choose from. You can add and remove actors. So one of the reasons why it had to be a stretch goal is not only just because right now all of the editor controls are only exposed through the Unity editor and a GUI interface would have to be added, but also because a lot of the stuff since it's really only developed for me to use, a lot of the stuff doesn't really work fully. Like it does work, but as far as a user experience level goes, there are certain things that, for example, the attunement that the character has won't actually update until you reload the level. And I mean, as far as for my purposes go, I know what's happening, so I don't need to worry about it. But for the average user, you'd want it to behave as appropriately as possible. And on a previous take for this video, I had redrawn the tiles here, so that's why the tiles had changed. So I hadn't saved before I reloaded, but yeah, it's little things like that would need to be changed, but it's usable as far as my use case goes. So other tools involve, like, you can raise the topology, and that's just as simple as pressing the button. I've added a little animation for when you raise it because I did anticipate one day wanting to expose this stuff to the player. Just because it was a feature that I enjoyed so much in Advance Wars. And I really like, you know, any game. Like Age of Mythologies also had a really good level editor. I really enjoyed making levels in that. It's not really the same kind of game, but you get what I'm saying. Let's see. You can also, this isn't really reflected in any of the levels that are currently in the game, but you can actually just make tiles empty. And that's just sort of a thing that you can add to make more like maze-like maps where like there are certain tiles that no player can cross. What else is there? Terrain. Birds are technically a part of the terrain because they don't interact in the same way as actors. What else is there? Oh right, in the terrain, that's also where you would add grass. Add grass, you can see that the grass reacts to the player position. Actually, it's funny because if you place a bird right next to a player, the birds will immediately fly off because they're programmed to scatter when a character is nearby. Water is a separate tool. It has its own depth. As you can see, when you place a water tile, it raises the selector icon, so it has its own separate depth. You can actually also place it on empty tiles so that you could theoretically have water that is that just goes into the abyss. There is a water raising and lowering tool just the same as there is for the regular topology. If you lower the topology, the water goes with it because it does have its own separate depth value. I mean, that's getting into more technical stuff, but it's a really useful tool because it does make designing maps so much easier for me. If this ever did get exposed to the player, I'd add way more tools, such as like the ability to raise and lower more than just a single tile at once, so you could do like a kind of marquee selection or something. But yeah, that's pretty much it in terms, I think, of things to show off. A lot of what goes on behind the scenes is actually handled by scripts that are loaded for each level. So things like cutscenes and stuff are actually all handled in a separate script that would run when the actual game is running. But so I don't think anything like that would ever be exposed because I don't know, that would be unless I came up with like an entirely separate scripting language or something, it would be not a great idea to expose or allow players to be able to manipulate the C# script, because a lot of potential to actually break the game. But yeah, it's so like maybe cutscenes wouldn't be available, but you'd be able to make little scenarios like this. Yeah, and the reason I had to fix up the level editor before I get going into building towns is because, of course, the towns themselves are going to be designed in just the same way as the maps. They're just handled differently, where the actors are interactable as NPCs rather than enemies. But yeah, that's some of the stuff that's been going on this week. I hope you found this interesting. There will be more about the towns and stuff next week. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.